Hungarian Folk Tales. The Silken Meadow. Once upon a time, there lived a great king, and the king had a gallant, handsome son. But alas, the king was always sad. One day his son decided to ask him why he was always so sad, and his father, the king, replied, "I see, my son, that you are a valiant man of courage and skill, for you triumph over the finest swordsmen, and you fell the most ferocious beasts. But I can find no joy in this, for I have a close friend from whom 6 months ago I received a message. There is a beautiful silken meadow in the middle of the golden forest. My friend lives there." But the witches were so envious of his wondrous lands that they sent their minions to descend on him in their thousands. He has begged me to come to his aid, but as you see, I am old and I cannot go. "Dear father, then I will go. I will wander the forest until I find your friend." "Good, my son. May the Lord go with you. But listen closely to me. Behind the stables there is a large pit full of mud. There you will find the horse I rode in my youth. I urge you to take him as your mount. But first you must feed him. In the garden you will find 12 bundles of wood. Set them all aflame, and when they have burnt to cinders, take the horse from the pit and feed him, for he eats nothing but smouldering coals." So he set the wood aflame, and when it had burnt to cinders, the prince took the horse from the mud pit and dragged him to the burning coals. Then the horse began to eat and grew visibly stronger and more vigorous. When he had finished, his coat glistened. The prince stood gaping in wonder, for he had noticed that the horse had 6 legs. His father spoke, "Now, dear son, go up to the attic. There you will find shimmering swords, but among them you will see one covered with rust. Take it as yours." So the prince went up to the attic and brought down the rusty sword. He tried to draw it from its scabbard, but he was unable. "No, son, that is not how you draw this sword. You tell it, 'Sword, come forth from your scabbard.'" Hardly had the prince uttered these words and the sword flew from the scabbard, slicing the air with a swoosh. "Now tell it, 'Sword, come back to your scabbard.'" Hardly had the prince uttered these words and the sword was already back in its scabbard. Father and son embraced. Both shedding tears, they bid farewell. The prince mounted the 6-legged horse, and the horse flew into the air, straight as an arrow. Then the horse slowed and began to descend into a beautiful forest filled with trees of gold. There the prince set off on foot. Soon he saw the edge of the silken meadow, and in the middle of the meadow, a tent. And when he reached the tent, he saw a grey-haired man sleeping on a bed. In one of the corners of the tent there hung a curtain. Pulling the curtain aside, he saw a beautiful gold bed, and in it lay a maiden with golden hair and a golden dress. One of her legs and one of her arms were hanging off the side of the bed, and the prince stepped over to her, took her leg in his hand, and placed it gently back on the bed. The maiden was not asleep, but she watched him out of the corner of one eye. When the prince took her hand to place it on the bed, the maiden wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. "Let us be man and wife and live together forevermore. I know you are tired, so step back to the middle of the tent and sleep." The prince did as she asked and immediately fell into a deep slumber. As the prince fell asleep, the old man awoke and saw that there was a stranger in the tent. He drew his sword to fell the strange man, and as he was about to strike, it occurred to him to wonder, "This man also has a sword. I myself was asleep when he entered. He could have slain me. I will not do him any harm." And when the young prince awoke from his slumber, the old man spoke, "Boy, who are you, and what do you seek here? Unless I am mistaken, it is you that I seek. My father sent me to come to your aid. You are the son of my dear friend the Red King? I am. It is good that you have come, for the witch's minions have been besieging me now for well over a year. And I see you have brought your father's sword, the companion to mine. For you should know, young prince, that no matter how many witches I slay with mine, 10,000 more come in their place. Do you see that huge mountain? An old witch lives in a cabin in the mountainside, and she sends her minions in droves to attack me. Until we slay her, I will have no peace. They rose early the next day, and as the sun rose, the witch's minions came in droves. And they poured down the mountainside like lava from a hot volcano. Then they drew their swords and slashed them to pieces. The Red Prince set off for the mountain. His sword sliced through the witches like a knife through warm butter. When they reached the hole in the mountainside, he decided to go in and see what lay inside. And what do you think he saw? In the middle of a huge cabin, a loom, and at the loom, an old woman whose nose was so long and so crooked, it reached the ground. And the old witch pedalled so hard that every time she lifted the shuttle, 100 of her minions sprang forth, ordered them to attack the aged man. Go forth to the Silken Meadow, kill the old man. The prince leapt to the witch's side, took the dagger from his belt and thrust it into her heart. And what happened then? The huge mountain crumbled into dust and was scattered by the winds. In the space of a moment, it was as if it had never even been there. And what was there in its place? A beautiful silken meadow. The old man called his daughter forth and spoke, "Good prince, I have no other child, only this one daughter. If you love her, I shall give you her hand in marriage, and with it, my entire kingdom." So the priest came, and the prince and the maiden were married in the Silken Meadow, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. A talking vine, a smiling apple, and a jingling, tingling peach. Once upon a time, there lived a king who had 3 beautiful daughters. He was leaving for market one day when he asked his daughters, "Tell me, what would you like me to bring you from the market?" The eldest replied, "Dear father, bring me a golden dress." The second daughter replied, "Bring me a silver dress." "And what shall I bring for you?" the king asked his youngest daughter. "Dear father, bring me a talking vine, a smiling apple, and a jingling, tingling peach." The king shook his head. "If such things are to be found in this world, I will bring them to you, daughter dear." The king went to the market, where he quickly found and purchased a golden dress for his eldest daughter, a silver dress for his middle daughter, but he simply could not find a talking vine, a smiling apple, or a jingling, tingling peach. The king was downcast. It saddened him that he was unable to fulfill his most beloved daughter's wish. While he was brooding, his coach gave a sudden jolt and got stuck so deep in the mud that the horses could not pull it free. The king was furious because his trusty horses could race more quickly than the stars across the night sky. He sent to the village for help, and when news spread that the king's coach was stuck in the mud, men, women, and even small children came to lend a hand. To their shame, no one could push the king's coach free. All of a sudden, a pig appeared. "Oink, grunt, oink, your highness, give me your youngest daughter's hand, and I will free you, your horses, your coach, and everything." The king stood and stared in amazement, but whatever the king thought, he simply replied, "We will shake on it, a king's hand and a pig's trotter. If you free me, I will give you my youngest daughter's hand." The pig didn't wait, didn't hesitate. He wedged his snout under the wheels, gave a shove, and pushed the coach from the mud. The horses took off at a gallop, and the king was back in his castle in a flash. And when he got home, He gave his eldest daughter the golden dress and his middle daughter the silver dress. But with great sadness, he said to his youngest daughter, "My dear girl, my darling daughter, why didn't you ask for a dress too? For I failed to find a vine, a smiling apple, and a jingling, tingling peach." But hardly had he finished when he heard a gruff grunting outside. He looked out of the window and saw that the pig had even brought his wheelbarrow. "Oink, Grant, oink! I've come for your daughter. Let her come down and I'll carry her off in my wheelbarrow." "Stop there," thought the king. "I'll send you a maiden." A peasant girl was quickly found, robed in the beautiful golden dress, and sent out to meet the pig. But the pig was no fool. He said to the king, "Oink, Grant, oink! This is not your daughter." The king began to regret that he had ever given his word to a filthy swine. And the princess? She sobbed and moaned so terribly that the whole palace shook. The king, shedding bitter tears of grief, told her, "My dear daughter, I have promised you to the pig, so you must go." Then the king had an idea. He dressed his youngest daughter in dirty rags and sent her out to meet the pig. The pig, when he saw the princess, was beside himself with joy. He grabbed the girl, placed her in the wheelbarrow, and carried her off, grunting and oinking all the way. "Oink, Grant, oink! Don't cry, princess. You'll be happy with me. We'll soon be home." But the daughter only really began to sob when the pig came to a stop in front of a large sty, took her inside and sat her down on dirty straw. "Oink, Grant, oink! This is my home," said the pig, and he offered her some corn. "Oink, Grant, oink! Have a bite to eat, princess." But the princess simply sobbed and moaned. She cried and cried until she eventually fell into a deep, deep slumber. The princess slept and slept, and she didn't wake until noon the next day. As the noon bell rang, she opened her eyes and, wonder of wonders, she was dazzled by a blinding light. She had lain down in a pigsty, and now, lo and behold, she awoke in a palace. A host of maids hurried to her bedside. They brought her sumptuous robes and dressed her beautifully. Then they took her into the neighbouring room, where a handsome youth sat at a table laden with food. He said to her, "Take a seat. Everything you see is yours. I too am yours, if you will have me." "Who are you? What are you?" the girl asked. "I will tell you in good time. Come now to the garden." He took her arm, and they went into the garden. In the garden, a fine vine leaned towards the maid, and the clusters of grapes spoke. "Pick us from the vine, princess." They walked on, and soon she espied an apple tree, the little red apples on its boughs smiling beautifully. "And as you see, we have smiling apples too," said the youth. They walked a little more. "What is jingling and tingling so sweetly?" the princess asked. "Jingling, tingling peaches, as you wished. Now will you stay and be my wife?" The princess wrapped the youth in her arms. "Yes, I will stay and be your loving wife for the rest of my life." But the youth then told her how he had once been a king, but a cruel witch had changed him into a lowly swine and put a curse on him. He would remain a pig until he found a maid who had wished for a talking vine, a smiling apple, and a jingling, tingling peach. They sent word out that very day, inviting every member of his kingdom to the wedding. Their fabulous feast was indeed a wondrous sight to see, and they both lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Discontented Cooking Pot. cooking pot was bored with boiling and bubbling all day, so he began to complain to the walking stick. "I can't bear to stay here anymore." "I too long to leave this place," replied the walking stick. "So let us set out together, my friend." "Yes, let's, for the journey is always more pleasant when one has company." The pot and the walking stick set out to see the world. Neither of them was terribly clever. The pot, as of course you know, was empty inside, and the walking stick was hardly famous for his wit. At first, however, things looked promising. For when the pot was almost trampled on the path by the angry bull, the walking stick leapt up and began to whack the bull soundly on its backside. And while the walking stick was walloping the bull, the pot jumped into the river. "Swim, swim," shouted the walking stick. "I'll catch up with you soon." The walking stick soon grew bored with whacking the bull, so he too jumped into the water. He thumbed his nose at the bull, who bellowed from the bank, but was unable to follow him. At the end of the village, the walking stick came across a pack of stray dogs. And when the dogs attacked, the cooking pot shouted, whack them, my friend." And the stick gave the dogs a sound beating. And as they continued on their way, they came across the terrible monster of the mines. The monster of the mines was terrified, for he had never seen a pot and a walking stick out for a stroll all on their own before. "Horrors, what a fright! I'll grab my bag and take flight." And the monster of the mines fled and took shelter in the hollows of the cliff. And as he ran so quickly, he failed to notice that there was a hole in his bag, and glittering gold coins were falling on the ground. But the pot and the walking stick noticed. "Come, come, let's gather them up." The walking stick neither dillied nor dallied. He gathered up the coins and put them into the pot. The pot was brimming with gold. No one would have dared to call him empty-headed anymore. "How fortunate we've been," they said to each other, and they began to weave the most elaborate plans, visions of wealth and grandeur for their future together. The pot thought to himself, "I shall find someone who will wrap me in wire and make me immortal. They will cover me with wire, strong wire, all over, that I may never crack or break. And once I have ensured my immortality, I will ensure myself a life of leisure and comfort. I will bribe the cook to make sure I am always brimming over with stuffed cabbage." For the pot simply adored stuffed cabbage. Then the walking stick's vanity also rose to the fore. "From now on, I will be a great lord. And after I have split the riches with my friend, I will find a skilled blacksmith and have a golden button made for my head." But then again, he thought after a moment, if I had all the gold we found to myself, I wouldn't have to content myself with a mere button. I could have my entire head covered in gold. Heavens, it would be simply splendid. I would be the most beautiful walking stick in the country. Maybe even the king would notice. Perhaps he would even want me to be his sceptre. And why should I not have all the gold? For am I not the stronger one? His head was teeming with cruel and murderous thoughts. And when the pot laid down his head to sleep at night, the walking stick snuck over to his side and delivered him a single lethal whack. And thus the pot's good fortune turned out to be deadly misfortune. The poor pot shattered fragments, clattered, clacked and cried out, "Murderer! Murderer!" But the walking stick barely noticed his cries, and he stuffed the golden coins in a sack and set off to find a blacksmith. "God's blessings on you, good blacksmith. What have you brought me, honourable walking stick?" "A sack full of golden coins, blacksmith." "Where did you get that, you rascal?" "I found it by the side of the road," said the walking stick, feigning a look of innocence. "And what do you plan to do with all that money?" You are but a mere walking stick. Good blacksmith, make me a golden knob for my head. The blacksmith took the golden coins, melted them, shaped them into a lovely knob, and soldered it on to the walking stick's head. There you are, he said to the walking stick. You may now set out to find yourself a wife. But his golden head, itself the fruit of his cruel act, would bring him no joy, only misfortune. His path took him deep into the forest, and Black Jack, the infamous bandit, spotted him. And the brigand spoke. The knob on that walking stick is made of gold, if I am not mistaken. Look, Matty, how shiny it is. Let's chase him down, grab him and take his golden knob. Stop, stop, they cried. But naturally the walking stick did not stop, but ran from the bandits. He was gasping for breath when he reached the top of the high hill, and the bandits were still hot behind him. At the bottom of the tremendous chasm gaping below him flowed the waters of the mighty river. The walking stick had little choice but to jump into the waters below. He tried to summon his courage. I am, after all, a walking stick. I can swim. I am made of wood. I will reach the far bank. I am, after all, a walking stick. I can swim. I am made of wood. I will reach the far bank. And so he jumped into the waters. But lo, soon the waves were splashing over his head. He sank to the bottom, never again to rise to the surface. For the golden knob, the spoils of a cruel misdeed, pulled him into the depths, down, 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 to a watery grave. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Lazy Boy. Once upon a time, there was a penniless woman. Her husband had died, and all she had left was a lazy son. Everyone called him Lazy Jack because he hated to work. The whole year through, he did not a bit of work, simply crouched in the corner in the winter time and dawdled in the shade in the summertime. One day the poor woman said to him, "Dear son of mine, bring me a can of water from the mighty river so that I can wash your filthy shirts and trousers." The lad merely shrugged his shoulders. "I would gladly go if I weren't so very lazy." But the poor woman continued to plead. "Come, my dear boy, if you go, fetch me some water so that I can wash. What will the world say? That I dress you in a dirty shirt and dirty trousers?" And she kept pestering him until finally he grabbed a can and plodded along to the river. He dipped the can into the water and was bringing it home. Well, as it so happens, a little fish in the can began to speak. "Listen, boy, set me free. Please pour me back into the mighty river." The boy replied, "I would gladly pour you back, but I am too lazy to go back to the river." But the tiny fish beseeched him, and finally the lazy boy turned back and poured the little fish back into the water. Again the fish spoke, "Thank you for your good deed, but I would like to repay your kindness. If ever there is anything you wish, simply say, 'Fish, fish, little fish, come grant me my wish.'" And no sooner had he spoken than he disappeared into the waters of the river. Lazy Jack took the water home, and barely had he put down the can when he put his hand on his belly and exclaimed, "Mother, I'm hungry." "If you are hungry, son, go where you might find something to eat." Suddenly Jack remembered the tiny fish and the promise it had made. "Fish, fish, little fish, come grant me my wish. Wine, meat and bread, a sumptuous dish." Hardly had he uttered the words when the table was creaking beneath the weight of food. Jack and his mother both ate their fill and were barely able to stand up from the bench. The poor woman began to do the washing up, and Jack lay down in a cool spot behind the house. As he lay there, the king's daughter came strolling along. "Ah, Lazy Jack, you have time to be lazy even when others are at work?" Lazy Jack got angry and retorted, Fish, fish, little fish, come grant me my wish. Make this girl meek and mild, pregnant with child. And miracle of miracles, wonder of wonders, the princess indeed became pregnant. Each day her belly grew a little bit bigger, and 9 months later she gave birth to a baby boy. The child was beautiful, but in vain. The king was not pleased. He besieged his daughter with questions, wanting desperately to know who the father was. But she swore on heaven and earth that never had she once passed a night with any man. But the boy must have a father. The earth yields no crop if nothing is sown. Wise men and sages advised the king to gather all the men in the kingdom, every last one, and make them stand in a line. Then they told him to put an apple in the child's hand and wait to see which man he gave it to, for that man must be the child's father. Well, if it's that simple, I will order this to be done. And all the men in the kingdom were ordered to assemble. First came the soldiers, then the reservists, then all the other men. In vain, the child didn't give the apple to anyone. What could be wrong, wondered the king. Could the wise men have been mistaken? But the wise men insisted they were not mistaken, but that the king had clearly failed to summon all the lads of the land. Again the men were counted, and they realised that they had failed to summon Lazy Jack. So the king sent his soldiers to fetch him that instant. But it took half a day for him to come, for Lazy Jack had been asleep in the attic, and waking him up proved quite a task. But when they pushed him in through the door, the small child immediately gave him the apple. And suddenly everything was clear. Lazy Jack was the father of the princess's little boy. The king, of course, had hoped that the father would be a prince or a great man, and was not at all pleased at how things had turned out. You have brought shame upon my old head, and you should be punished. So the king had his daughter, his grandson, and Lazy Jack placed in a barrel and thrown into the river. The water carried them downstream. At first the princess sobbed and moaned, but soon she realised that although he was lazy, Jack was a good and honest lad. She said to him, "Listen, Lazy Jack, this barrel is too small for the three of us. I would like a palace the likes of which I am accustomed to. Do something to get us out of this barrel." "I would gladly do something," said Lazy Jack, "but I am simply too lazy." But the princess continued to beseech him, and soon Jack grew tired of listening. Fish, fish, little fish, come grant me my wish, a palace tall with towering walls. He had barely finished his thought when the waters of the river suddenly threw the barrel to the banks, where it broke into pieces. Then they found themselves before the gates of a beautiful palace. "Oh, how beautiful," said the princess. "This must be our palace." It was indeed their palace, thanks to the tiny fish and his magic. They made it their home and lived together happily. Lazy Jack slept so much that unless the princess had woken him up, he might very well have grown roots. And that's the end of my tale about Lazy Jack. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Little Pig and the Wolves. Once upon a time, there was a little pig who lived in a little house in the middle of a vast forest. The little pig was cooking supper one day when a scruffy wolf knocked on his door. "Little pig, let me in. It's so cold out here, I'll freeze to death." "No, I won't let you in because you'll eat me up." Just let my back leg in or I'll freeze to death. The little pig put a big pot of water to boil on the fire, and then he let the wolf's back leg into the house. Oh, little pig, please let my other back leg in too. Little pig, please let my 2 front feet in now. The little pig let the wolf's 2 front feet in, but the scruffy wolf still wasn't happy. Little pig, please let all of me in, and I promise I won't hurt a hair on your head. The little pig found a sack and held it open so that the wolf would walk right into it. And that's what he did. The little pig wasted no time and tied the sack up in a flash. Then he took the pot off the fire and poured boiling water all over the wolf. The steaming hot water made the wolf shout, and he wriggled and jiggled until he pushed the sack open. The bold, scolded wolf jumped out of the sack and saw the little pig sitting at the top of the tree. And the wolf ran off to find help. The bold, scolded wolf eventually returned with the other wolves. The wolves thought and thought about how they would catch the little pig, as none of them could climb a tree. At long last, they decided to stand on one another's shoulders until they reached the little pig. The wolves climbed quickly one on top of the other. The bold, scolded wolf stayed at the bottom because he was afraid of heights, so the others all climbed on top of him. The Tower of Wolves reached up to the sky until they only needed one more wolf on the top. The last wolf started to climb, and the little pig shouted, "Pour hot water on the bold one!" The bold, scolded wolf leapt out from the bottom of the pile and ran as fast as his legs could carry him. The wolves tumbled to the ground in a heap of furry bones. Then all the little piglet had to do was to jump down from the tree and go back into his little house. And the bad wolves never dared come near again.